Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a critic, consultant, and programmer based in Toronto, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Aimee Carrero, who's been in everything from The Americans, Blind Spot, and Your Friends and Neighbors to Mac and Rita, The Menu, and Spirited. She's also voiced the title roles in Elena of Avalor and She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, which makes her a double princess. And this month you can see her co-starring with Rainn Wilson and Lil Rel Howery in Christopher Leone's paramedic comedy Code 3, which I programmed in TIFF's Industry Select Series last year and will now be available on digital and on demand this Friday, December 19th. Imagine a season of The Pit compressed into an hour and a half. It's pretty good. Aimee picked The Birdcage, Mike Nichols' adaptation of the French sensation La Cage aux Folles, with Robin Williams and Nathan Lane taking the roles of Armand and Albert, a long-term couple whose bright theatrical life in South Beach is thrown for a loop when their son, played by Dan Futterman, announces his engagement to the very nice Barbara, played by Callista Flockhart. The problem? Her parents are conservative heroes, and they're played by Gene Hackman and Diane Wiest. The stage is set for a farcical collision between two very different families, and that's exactly what audiences got when The Birdcage opened in theaters in the spring of 1996. Also, Hank Azaria is there. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I have been dying to talk about this movie for years. I talk about it to anyone who will listen. In my opinion, I think it's the perfect film. Obviously a huge Mike Nichols fan, obviously a huge Elaine May fan. But what I find about this movie is that pretty much everybody can enjoy it. It also is an expert use of, farce, but also like satirical comedy, also has a heart, immaculately acted, perfectly cast, and selfishly or personally, I grew up in Miami, takes place in Miami, and it also involves a very famous play, La Cage aux Folles, based on that, and I'm a big theater nerd, so it's like hitting all of my interests at once. And so therefore, I want to make the case that it is the perfect film.
Okay, and obviously you're not old enough to have seen it the first time through. So when did you discover it, and how?
I am old enough to have seen it, but I wasn't old enough to be like, Mom, take me to the movie theater to see The Birdcage. But I was definitely alive when it came out. I must have seen it on HBO or maybe even like a Blockbuster rental. My parents, are also lovers of any kind of like ostentatious display in film and theater and television. So I could see them picking it out of a lineup at Blockbuster or maybe hearing about it because I think it came out in 1996. So that was like firmly in my childhood in Miami. And that I don't remember the first time I saw it, but it must have been that because no one else would have probably shown me that. I went to Catholic school. They certainly wouldn't have shown it to me there. So, but I always remember it being like a very much a comfort movie for me. And over the years, it's taken on a whole other life as I've gotten into this industry and, tried my hand at comedy and become a huge admirer of Michael Nichols' work and Elaine May's work and every actor in this movie. So it's lived with me through a lot of iterations in my life.
I do find it fascinating that this specific film and La Cage aux Folles too, really became these massive mainstream hits.
Yeah.
It's almost a subversive act. Like it was definitely a subversive act on Nichols and May's part to bring this to the quote unquote mainstream in 1996. I mean, it's the Clinton years and things are better.
Yeah.
But the thing that struck me this time, just rewatching it for this, the thing that struck me is that the original La Cage aux Folles from 78 and this are on opposite ends of the AIDS panic, or not panic, the AIDS pandemic.
Right.
And you are seeing a completely different cultural take on freedom, on liberation, than it was in 78, when it was just sort of the outgrowth of the club scene more than anything else. And the shock of a middle-aged homosexual couple meant something very different because now they're survivors.
Yes. Now they're survivors. They have a grown child. They're doing the mundane thing of marrying off a child. You know what I mean? And the things that you do for your children, right? Like you try to make yourself more palatable or whatever for them, or, change things about yourself because they're embarrassed or because they don't know how to present themselves in society with you as their parent. Like, I think everybody can maybe relate to that in one way or another, even if you're not a parent. Like I remember making my dad drop me off 2 blocks away from school because I was embarrassed, that he would drop me off in our like beat up Nissan, So there are little things like that we can touch upon in this film and see ourselves in. And when I haven't read, my husband read the Mike Nichols biography by Mark Harris. And I was like, can you find the chapter that they talk about the birdcage? Because I have been meaning to read this book for years and haven't, obviously. But he does talk about the Mark Harris talks about how Nichols was supposed to make this movie in 1983 or something, like 10 years after, or close to 10 years after the original
Yeah,
film.
he was apparently going to direct it on stage on Broadway, but got
Oh, on
fired. And then since
stage.
then kept trying to make it as a movie.
Got it.
So it
Okay.
took him another, well, I guess 13 years to get it to camera.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he had a vision for it on stage and it never happened.
Interesting. I always think too that every artist sort of like worth their salt is kind of, or not maybe all artists, but like all art that feels like it strikes me as good art, whatever that means, seems to be a little prophetic, right? Like we can watch it 30 years later and we're like, whoa, how did they know that in, 1996? Or, talking about another Mike Nichols, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Like I think, or even like we can go back to Death of a Salesman, right? Like how that feels like the fall of like North American promise, of whatever, of the American dream. Like Arthur Miller was able to see that decades before we like actually saw it happening, or before our eyes. And I think in the same way, like Nichols and May in writing this movie, there is a quote in this book where I think like some studio head was talking to him about, well, how are we going to get through the homosexuality of of society? Like, how are we going to get this movie made? And he said something, let me see if I can find it. He said, by the time this movie comes out, you won't be able to parody these guys anymore. They'll be parodying themselves. And he was right. And he's talking about that sort of like anti LGBTQ movement of like many, many decades, but like really kind of maybe cresting in like the late 90s, right? Where we're talking about like maybe like Will and Grace is about to come out, and like,
Right.
it's becoming it's infiltrating into the mainstream art. And he was so right. He made this movie before that sort of like Fox Newsification of politics, right? Where it's become kind of a parody of itself. And he wasn't worried about it. The book also just talk about like how he wasn't necessarily super comfortable in that space. Speaking about it's speaking to Nathan Lane about like being a gay man. Like Nathan Lane talks about he never brought it up to me. We never talked about it outright. There were some, the usage of like the F word, not fuck, but the other F word, in the script. And Nathan Lane was like, hey, I don't feel comfortable using that. And they were like, well, we'll just get it and we'll try other ones, but we'll get it. And they ended up using it anyway. So it was a little bit of that sort of disconnect of the generational kind of like understanding of how we acknowledge, homosexuality, and how that umbrella, the LGBTQ umbrella, has grown in the mainstream. But I thought that was really interesting because it feels still so fresh when you watch the movie. It still feels like this can be a conversation happening in a house down the block. Maybe not to this degree, like a senator coming to the house and you own a drag club underneath, your nice Miami penthouse, but it does feel like something that is a little bit timeless. We can still relate. There, gay people aren't, welcomed with open arms the world over. These are still issues that come up, and there is still a huge anti-LGBTQ movement in in the United States, at least, in the politics. It's a big, topic of conversation. However, horrible. It is what it is.
Yeah, no, it's an easy pull for these guys, right? Like they can always go to that well.
Yeah.
And the really shocking's the wrong word, but the surprising thing is how um like how weirdly tolerant this film is of the right-wing characters. And I
Yeah.
think part of that is simply by casting Gene Hackman and Diane
Oh my
Weiss. Like
gosh.
you
Yeah.
get a buy-in from the audience because there is this sense, oh, they're just playing. This is just,
Yeah.
they're everyone is
This
just
is a
having a
cut.
good time.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't really believe this. And I don't believe that Hackman or Weiss was ever, tracking trending
Right.
white in that way.
Yeah.
But they look the part. So that's another kind of fun subversive mirror that they can use where
Yeah.
I think Gene Hackman can get away with saying things in this movie at that point in time that maybe
Yeah.
someone like, I don't know, Kevin Sorbo couldn't. It's a
Oh,
weird one
100%. Yeah. Oh,
now anyway.
totally. Yeah. And I think there is something also about this movie that we see happening a lot nowadays, right? With like, let's say someone like RFK, right? Like you're so left, you're right kind of thing, like, or you're so right, you're left. So in Gene Hackman's character, there's that great scene where he's just talking about how Mrs. Coleman is the ideal American housewife.
Right.
And, she can do no wrong. In fact, she's an even better housewife than his own wife, Diane Weist's character. And she gets jealous of her because she's just the perfect, delicate flower who cry. There's a line that she was like, she cries when you call her mother. That's how delicate she is. Gene Hackman says that. And they're sort of like, bolstering her up as the quintessential like family values, leave it to beaver mother, um and in the end she's not any of those things. She's a fictional character. She's an extension of Nathan Lane's character's drag. And that, I don't know what that's saying, but it's saying something. And then when Christine Baranski's character comes in and she is like, by all accounts on paper, like the biological mother, and she is a female and, uh, whatever, has all of these feminine attributes, and yet she's probably one of the most masculine characters in the movie,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of coding. Like she doesn't want a child. In fact, she, she kind of sells him, she was like the money you gave me helped me to start my exercise business, and I think that's a really interesting uh show or an interesting display. It's not really said, but it's shown. And I think every good movie, things are said or things are shown and not necessarily explicitly said. Although the dialogue in this movie is perfection also.
Yeah, it is. It's a beautifully structured. I mean, I think that's the other thing Nichols said, that he always wanted to make a movie out of the play because the structure is, he said, perfect.
Yeah.
It's basically a reverse heist where people are just pulling the
Totally.
wool over people's eyes, but the audience is on their side. And at no point is there ever what is it? At no point is there ever a disconnect between what the audience want and what the heroes want. We understand
Yeah.
why they're making bad choices when they make them.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
he knew that when Nathan Lane walks out basically as Barbara Bush,
Totally.
you never have to make that point. You never have to
Yeah.
underline it. But that's exactly what you said. Like she is instantly, that persona is instantly embraced as the perfect Republican representation of womanhood, which is old, harmless, docile,
Mhm.
subservient, and asexual.
Yeah, totally. You don't want to fuck her,
No,
but
nobody
you want her
does.
to make you a sandwich. And what I love too about the Nathan Lane character and the Robin Williams character is that, in the end, they can all come together under the shared values of we just want our children to be happy and safe. That's it. When she talks about, there's that great line where she talks about, or sorry, when Nathan Lane's character comes in and Robin Williams, Armand says to Albert, he's getting married. Val's getting married. And he says, married, but he's only a baby, and that is a reaction that I think every parent has, whether their child is 45 or 21, like Val is in the movie. And it doesn't matter that they're two men living together. What matters is they've raised person, and they think that he's still too young to get married and he's still a baby because he's their baby no matter how old he is. So I think they actually have a lot of overlap. The Gene Hackman character, the Senator Keeley character, and Albert, and by some extension Armand, like they all want the same thing. They want to keep their family close together, protected, and happy. How they get there is different, and they sort of like villainized each other. One party, obviously,
More so,
much
yeah.
more successfully than the other. But in the end, it's the common ground that makes you kind of root for everybody, because that really what they want is, their kids to be happy.
Yeah. And I do love the other thing, which is I don't even know if it's in the script, if something that Nichols came up with on set or the actors figured it out themselves. But there is this great mirroring that's going on between the two couples, where they're both just a little tired of each other's eccentricities.
Yeah, totally. They've just been married a little too long.
Yeah. They know each other so well that they know each other too well. I mean, there's moments where Louise rolls her eyes at the senator, and there's moments where Armand is just totally losing his patience with Albert. And in both cases, the fact that it's Robin Williams playing the relatively straight guy, the straight man role in that couple, and that it's Diane Wiest, who had just won 2 Oscars for being, big flustered Woody Allen performances.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the only way that Woody Allen saw her. And here she just gets to do something completely different, which is play the realist.
Yeah. Yeah. And really the muscle behind this like senator who, he's got this like big important job, and he gets to go on CNN and, proselytize his version of whatever American dream. But she's really the one, there's that one line where she was like, listen, we'll get the Pope's blessing. It's not hard. Like, we'll figure out how to make this palatable. And she's like spinning this PR yarn for how they're going to explain to the American public that their daughter is marrying the son of 2 drag club owners on South Beach. Again, a very masculine portrayal, right? Like, she's got a lot of masculine attributes, and her husband is the hysterical one, So it's turning a lot of that on its head, which I can't get enough of.
Yeah, I think it's a better way to get the audience to buy into the conflicts too. Like, the thing that doesn't happen in the original movie is there really is no consideration of the other side. Like, that's just not what it's about, which is fine. It was 1978. It's France. Totally. It's a completely different society.
Yeah.
But if you're going to make a movie in America and you want to open it wide, right? Like, you have to at least pretend you understand where the other side is coming from. And that, I think, is where Nichols was at his best.
Yes, absolutely. I see it a little. Yeah, I see it a little bit like when SNL tries to kind of spoof the other side too. They try it, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But in this case, I think it works so well. Because also the characters in the end learn something, right? The characters that we, as like a more progressive society, however many years later, can watch this back and be like, well, at least they learned their lesson. You know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe, at the end, there's that great, I keep quoting this movie because I can quote it all day, but like, you have the 2 drag queens at the church looking over on their side, and there's still a little bit of awkwardness between the both sides. And one of them says, Bob Dole is gorgeous. You know what I mean? And like the other side goes, well, which one's the mother? And she's like, I just don't know. And I think that's just that's so funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, it becomes palatable too, because the side that, I think is wrong learns their lesson.
Yeah. And these days too, I don't think you can tell the story without having someone completely humiliated at the end, right?
Totally.
Like, we've almost gone back to the way that Revenge of the Nerds used to work, where the comeuppance has to be spectacular. Well, Revenge of the Nerds is a terrible movie. It's a real genius, where the bad guy has to be completely humiliated and abandoned.
And outcast, right.
Right. And here you just get that weird grace of Gene Hackman in drag kind of getting into it for 1 second and then fighting it. But that's such a marvelous performance for him. He has that, like, the line reading of all of them. The one line that has stayed with me for 30 years is just him quietly muttering, I think I've gone insane, as though it is just occurring to him now that maybe he's wrong and the world is right. And he just, the collision of that in his head isn't working for him. And then he sort of just gets past it. And the
Yeah.
film is so ebullient that you're just kind of carried along with it. And
Yeah.
I don't think that would be allowed to happen now. He would, have to be run out of town on a rail or something. Because
Absolutely.
to be a
Yep.
Republican and indicate in any way that there might
Hmm.
be something,
Right.
decent or human or simply, human
Yeah.
to any alternative lifestyle, quote unquote, is suicide politically. And
Absolutely. But there would be like Twitter bans on both sides, think pieces on how, like, are we platforming the wrong people? Are we, and so maybe this is like an example of art made in a bygone era. I hope not. I think things end up coming back around one way or another. And maybe this is just my sort of like, people have, and I think a rightful critique of millennial sort of optimism, as far as like I grew up in like the Obama era, like we felt so much hope, like, and the newer generations, the younger generations, they have also been dealt a very difficult card, right? They've been handed an economy that's in shambles, a world that may not be here in a few years. I understand their pessimism, but this movie does kind of hit in the right spot for a lot of 30 somethings and 40 somethings and above, where we remember a time where people could have differences and sit around the dinner table and say, so your uncle is living with a man, like, I don't think that's right, but oh God, he makes the best, arroz con pollo I've ever had, or whatever, like it's very difficult to have those conversations now and certainly portray them in any kind of art form without getting some sort of blowback, that you're not, yeah.
James L. Brooks' new film is set in 2008 because it deals with politics, but it's also so
Right.
weirdly mushy that it won't identify the state it takes place in,
Interesting.
because that might bring fire. And it's a
Right.
really strange stance for a movie to take,
Yeah.
because we're going to make this absolute fantasy. And then the
Hmm.
film really isn't even about politics anyway. It's just about integrity, which politics is an easy stage for. But
Right.
it was really quite, I saw it last week, and it's very
Mm.
jarring to see a film that is so terrified of an audience that
Hate
it's
that
trying to
so much.
reach, right?
It feels a little bit like what separates then art without a point of view or whatever, like from like, I don't know, an advertisement or even like propaganda to a certain extent, right? Because if we're just constantly demonizing one side and not finding the humanity, because that's really what it is, we just dehumanized each other to a point where you can't say anything. And I know I'm going to get blowback for saying that. You know what I mean? I can sense it. I can feel it. It's something creeping up in the back of my head saying, don't say that. But it's true. Like when we lose the common thread of our humanity and the fact that some people just have bad takes. You know what I mean? Some people just have opinions that you don't agree with and you think are, bad takes. There's a difference. And I think this is something we're missing, a nuance that a lot of these keyboard warriors, myself included sometimes, are missing, is that, some people might have bad takes, but those people aren't making policy necessarily. The people that we should go after are the people that are in charge of the policy that we're subjected to, just because your neighbor, has, I don't know, some weird opinion, doesn't mean that that's going to affect your life, in a real way. Like I understand people going after, the Mitch McConnells of the world, right? Because their decisions have lasting, sometimes decades long policy consequences, and that makes sense to me. And one can make the argument of like, well, these are voters, and they're voting these people in, and all of that. But nothing was ever done. No one was ever convinced or persuaded by being villainized.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about Severin Films' massive saga erotica, an 11-disc box set of the original Emmanuelle trilogy that might just be the Christmas stocking stuffer you didn't know you wanted. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Simcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. I think, I don't know, like five years of aggressive right wing influence, more than five probably, but like since January 6th anyway,
Yeah.
and the absolute break with what you're seeing is not happening, what you're seeing is real. Like the two camps that came out of that, I think we've just watched everyone get more and more entrenched and decide that everyone individually holds ultimate truth. And it probably goes back further than that. It probably started with COVID and vaccinations and things like that, where people were just weaponized by Facebook into opposite camps. And I don't know that we get back from that. And I think a movie like The Birdcage being loved by people now, generation or two later, I'd be really curious to know how many of the people on the other side are fond of the film because they just grew up with it. It was always there, and they just don't understand that that's actually, a way of humanizing people, and the hate that they're throwing at imaginary predatory queers, whatever they, like whatever the current phrase is. And it's even worse in the UK, where it's just gone completely insane. There are ways to short circuit it, and culture is the first one. And just
absolutely.
right? Like the exposure of a diverse cast on Sesame Street in the late 60s was fundamental to like the next generation after the civil rights struggle, understanding and just sort of internalizing the idea that people with different skin colors can actually coexist, and probably will do better for that.
Right.
And then this 30 years later, The Birdcage kind of is that same statement. It's pretty white. And it's problematic that Hank Azaria is playing the Latino character. But weirdly, he'd already cornered the market on that with The Simpsons.
Totally. Yeah. And I think too, there's something about how we're consuming media now that doesn't allow for that sort of, I hate to use the word elevated, but what I mean by that is like curated, right? Like someone has sat down and written this script. It's not a TikTok video that they've thought about, none at all. And they just like press record, and it's like word salad. There is place for that. There is a place for that kind of media, but I think it's taken the space of, okay, well, I could sit down and watch a movie, or I can sit and scroll on my phone and watch somebody who's just like, maybe hasn't spent a year or 10 years, like maybe Mike Nichols had thinking about this or longer, fine-tuning every little bit, right? Instead, we're consuming media that is sort of like not curated, that's not really thought about. It's just kind of word vomit, and it's easy to consume, and we're just like scrolling. We're not learning anything new, right? Like there's no version of it that is appealing to our higher, angels. You know what I mean? It's all, we can learn something. I can learn how to do CPR from a YouTube video, and that's great, and there is a place for it. But there's nothing that's making me like sit and wax poetic about life, about a YouTube tutorial about CPR. Maybe watching a movie like Code 3 that somebody sat down and wrote and has thought a lot about it and is based on true experiences, would have the opposite effect. Maybe it'll teach you something, but hopefully, more likely, it will make you feel a certain type of way. It'll make you think in a different way. It'll show you a different perspective. We're not seeing different perspectives anymore because of the algorithm of social media. We're just in a vacuum, I read something the other day about, I don't know if it was like an iPad generation article or something like that, about how teachers are reporting that kids don't have vocabulary anymore that matches their age range like how it used to, because instead of consuming television or film or reading books, they're watching people their age using words they already know, going about their lives, doing things that, like mundane things, and they're not learning anything. They're not thinking like, oh, what's that word that I don't know? I'm gonna go look in the dictionary like we used to have to do, or even Google it. They're not doing that because they're not using words like that, because they're all the same age. You know what I mean? They're all sort of just recycling the same 135 words or whatever it is. And that's too bad.
Yeah, it is funny. The whole of, well, not the whole of culture, but there is absolutely a certain subset of popular culture which is more dedicated to give me the thing I like again,
Hmm.
more so than ever before, just because
Yeah.
you can algorithmically be directed to 875 versions of the same video with different text, right? Like people
Yeah.
falling down in a different way, or kids watching other kids play video games. I still don't understand the appeal of that, but apparently it's $1 billion industry now.
Yeah, it's like the performance of humanity. Like it's very interesting how it just feels safer to watch that than to do ourselves, you know?
Yeah. And it's not a walkthrough, it's
Right.
passive. You're
Hmm.
just observing, you're just watching. And the thing about Code 3 and the Birdcage, weirdly enough, that I knew I'd find a link.
Yeah.
Both of them use stardom to sort of trick people into watching something with meaning. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that Robin Williams, he's a delight. Let's go see
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
And here we have Rainn Wilson, who's sort of become this middle-aged grouch avatar of a certain type of
Yes.
culture, which always works for him. This is not a
Yeah.
negative. And
Hmm.
Laurel, who's again,
Yeah.
that's somebody you just want to follow into a room and see what he's going to do.
Yeah.
And here is a film about the collapse of uh, and American medicine and the desperate need for some kind of strategy that deals with mental health crises and wellness checks and all the other things that are weaponized is the wrong word, but become a minefield the
Hmm.
moment someone calls 911.
Oh my gosh. It's like, and I went on a ride along with one of the busiest fire department or busiest firehouse in Los Angeles County. And, the hostility with which some of these folks are met, you know what I mean? And this is not law enforcement. These are people who are literally there just to save your life, but whether it's the use of Narcan ruining someone's high or, just a general mistrust of like public services, right? Like if you're an undocumented person, like you don't know is how things going in the United States right now. People show up to get a green card, to go through the legal process and are detained by masked losers, you know what I
Yeah,
mean, calling
yeah,
themselves ICE. And it's like, who are you? Like, what were you doing before, through 2 years ago when all of this sort of really ratcheted up? Like, what were you doing? These sort of like cosplaying vigilantes. I don't even know who these losers are, and they're doing this in a way that just feels so fascist state coded. I mean, it's not even coded, it is, but so there sometimes is no distinction, that people are scared and they feel like there is no distinction between an EMT who is making $24,000 a year, who's literally just there to make sure that you don't code, and a nice agent. Like they don't know, and there's this big mistrust, and that I can't say is misplaced, Um, so yeah, it's a really difficult thing to have to deal with every single day of your profession.
yeah. Well, and watching it as a Canadian too, we don't have the apprehension about a bill
Right.
that so many people will have in the States, just because calling emergency services is automatically just like wherever you have no control, wherever you land is where you land,
Hmm.
and whatever it costs is what it costs. And that's only going to get worse,
Yeah.
apparently.
Yeah.
And then you watch something like The Birdcage, and it's a completely different time, right? Like
Hmm.
it's just the end of the first Clinton term. The election was just
Yeah.
rolling when it came out because it was a spring
Right.
release. I always think it's a fall movie, but of
I
course it's a
know it
spring.
should have been a fall movie, but it's like a March release or something. And now I don't know how you feel about. I know that you're this is your life. You're very steeped in film, but I have this thing. I'm like you would be very hard pressed to find me in a movie theater from the months of like January to March. Because I'm like, I'll just watch. I mean, I'm part of the problem, but even before Netflix, I'd be like, those movies we're not giving our best.
No, no.
We're
January
not
was
doing our
traditionally the
best.
dumping ground. I
The
absolutely
dumping
get that.
ground. But
Things are
now
getting
it's
better
not so much
now.
anymore. They
Yeah.
are better. Yeah, yeah. But back then, I'm like a March release and it was still, so well received. And I think it might have even gotten some nominations for some of the cast. Yeah, I think with the Birdcage, it's it's something that maybe feels nostalgic to me for that reason. And maybe I wasn't able to put it into words until you brought it up, but it reminds me of an era where, we were all just a little bit more willing to hear people out, um, even if they were dead wrong. And I think that this movie is a perfect encapsulation of that because I believe even still art is a great unifier, and you can really, without being manipulative, you can create an environment in which you allow someone to feel, period, and also feel for someone that they never thought they had anything in common with. And that's the great gift. I mean, that's why I think we get into this industry. It was certainly why I became an actor, because as an audience member, as a young person, I remember sitting in a theater observing life in this way, and feeling so moved by it and wanting to give that to somebody else. That's why we do what we do, but we're kind of slowly losing that ability to do it, because now we're having to pick sides in a way that feels really tribal in a way. And it helps nobody. And in the end, it's like, what are we doing? Are we just making propaganda here? Like what's going on?
Yeah, I wonder something like the reboot of The Naked Gun this year, which is absolutely on the side of the angels, right? Like there's a joke about how they can't really acknowledge that O.J. Simpson was part of the first series because of what happened subsequently. Yeah. And then there's other stuff. I mean, the whole point of the plot is about the manosphere and billionaires trying to do too much. Like, it is really wonderful. And I just wish I'd seen it in a big crowded theater to find out who was laughing at what, like where the jokes land, because it's pointed, but the way they get away with it is that everybody in the movie is an idiot, a high functioning idiot, but the joke of that Naked Gun world, right?
I loved it so much. I missed, like, when I saw it at my house. I was like, oh my God, I haven't seen anything like this in so long. And it was did it do well? I don't even know.
Okay.
It did okay.
It wasn't a massive hit. It wasn't Paramount's biggest or anything, but it did just fine. And it was part of this whole campaign about finally making people understand that you need to see comedies in a theater as well as big epic movies. Yeah. And trying to just inculcate the new generation that missed all of this stuff because of the pandemic shutdowns, that you can go and be 15 and see a movie and laugh, even if it doesn't have superheroes in it. Like, it's okay to enjoy yourself in a crowd.
Absolutely. And like romantic comedies and smaller films. Also, it's okay to make a movie that doesn't cost $200 million. You know what I mean?
It's advisable, frankly.
It's advisable. You can make a movie with a small budget and have, people that are recognizable and still hit all of those marks that, I don't know, some executive was wanting to hit. And still make a movie that is like, finds its audience. Not everything also has to appeal to everybody. You can have a niche movie that does well, or find its audience in one way or another. But it's really hard to convince people of that when, everything is a bottom line. And now, billionaires are owning media companies that, some dude that was peddling books 30 years ago is now in charge of content on a streamer. Like, what does he know about it? He knows about money, and he knows about making that money for his shareholders, and that's how we're making art now. And it's not the best. No,
the next James Bond will never go after a tech billionaire, for example. That's just not going to happen.
It's just not going to happen. Yeah.
But somewhere in there, you can still, if you're creative, if you're empathetic, you can find ways to reach people through unlikely means. And I think that's the trick. And you need, as with the Birdcage, as with The Naked Gun, like, you need actors who are willing to use their status and their persona against themselves almost, and take that risk and welcome it. And then the audience responds to that. And I saw The Birdcage in a packed theater. And when it was the first big laugh was the obvious Robin Williams one where you do this, you fussy, but you keep it all inside.
But you keep it all inside. Yeah.
And
amazing.
It's just a huge laugh. And it was this little moment where it's just like, oh, everybody got that. And then I wasn't sure they did, but they got the energy of it.
They
And
got
that's
the
the
energy.
buy-in, right? Like he's
Yeah.
there to welcome us into this world.
Yes, yes. Here's like the the sort of like entryway drug, if you will,
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
this universe. And it's like we can all have a good time. We can all enjoy. You don't have to know what it's like to, go to a drag ball or a club. You don't have to know what it's like to love someone that's the same sex as you, or you don't have to know what it's like to be a senator or a superhero or whatever in order to have a shared common humanity. And that's what I think I must love about this movie. I had the great fortune of working with Callista Flockhart on a production of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf at the Geffen Theater in Los Angeles, and she played Martha. And I remember, the first question I wanted to ask her, everybody was asking her about Ally McBeal, Harrison Ford. I was like, I just want to know about the Birdcage. What do you have to say about the Birdcage? And, I don't know, I'm sure she's talked about it publicly before. And she was like, it was just an amazing experience. Everything you thought you think it was, and all of that. And working with Mike Nichols is amazing. And she was like, but he told me, he pulled me inside and he was like, you would make such a great honey, the other character in Who's Afraid of Virginia
Mhm.
Woolf. And she was like, well, who I really want to play is Martha. And he was like, well, you're going to have to age like 30, 40 years before you can do that. And she was like, and I have, and this is me doing that. And I just thought, oh God, that was just so cool. And getting to work with somebody who has made such an impression on my life, or has been a part of a project that has made such an impression on my life and had great things to say about the experience, is really special. Because sometimes, it's like people are like, never meet your heroes or don't ask them about the thing. But I was really just so tickled to know that it was just everything that I thought it was.
Yeah. And it does feel like Nichols never let an actor down. Like even when
Hmm.
he had some casting issues that weren't always the best, and there were substitutions sometimes, but yeah, I'm thinking of something like Catch 22, where
Yeah,
everybody is pitched at a different register,
right.
and the satire is so big that you just get the feeling that there's the chance of the whole thing shaking itself apart at any given moment. And it
Right.
was only his third or fourth film, and he was nervous about the satire and the adaptation. And if anything, it's like it's too faithful to the text.
You're right.
But there's still this incredible talent pool in there. Like I'd forgotten Charles Grodin is in there,
Wow.
he
Yeah.
plays a murderer, and he's eerily convincing. But he was just so good at finding places to put people. And I
Yeah.
think Birdcage is probably the first time I had seen Flockhart in it. It was like one of her very first roles, wasn't it?
It had to have
Not
been.
the
She was
first.
like, she looked 18. I don't know if she was, but she must have been so young. And like Dan Futterman, like, if I were to recast the movie, not that I don't think this should ever be remade. It's a perfect movie and it should stay that way.
I
But
don't see how you
I,
could. It would have to
I
be a
don't see how
period
you
piece.
could. But
Yeah.
like, he was also perfectly cast. And that must have been one of his first. I didn't do any research on his casting at all. But, I was reading that originally it was supposed to be Robin Williams and
Oh, I knew this too.
Steve Martin.
Yes, and Martin didn't think he could. He wanted to play Armand, but didn't think he could be camp enough. And then
Yeah.
Williams wanted to play Armand because he'd been to camp in other films.
In Mrs. Doubtfire, he'd just done Mrs. Doubtfire. He
Yeah.
was like, I don't want to do the dress anymore. And so it's funny how that happens, how like some of these characters, you're like, I could never imagine anybody else in this role. They almost didn't do it. Nathan Lane was supposed to star in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and somehow got Scott Rudin of all people to say, "Oh, push it a year so you can make this movie." I don't think that has ever happened again with Scott Rudin, but like has never been convinced to do anything he doesn't want to do.
Mhm.
But like incredible, and that this all came together. And I think that like even with the more problematic things in the movie, no movie ages perfectly. With the Hank Azaria, like I'm from Miami, I'm Latina from Miami, and I take no offense. I'm not speaking for everybody, but he just did he approached it with such respect, and honestly, approached it with such accuracy that it's hard to be mad at it. You know what I mean? I'm like, he does this thing where he says like "ay Dios," right? Like he says that all the time. I'm like, unless he went to Miami and spent a good amount of time among Latin people, he would not know to say it that way, right? Because
Right.
what he's saying is "ay Dios," right? Like, oh my God. But he's saying it in a way that's like so like Caribbean, Latin, like specific. It's very
Mhm.
Puerto Rican, it's very Cuban, it's very Dominican. And I don't know if he did any of that or if he's just like an incredibly gifted accent actor, which we know he is. Maybe he just picked it up from a recording. I have no idea, but it's hard to be mad at something that's that accurate. So I certainly take no offense, but yeah, even things like that, we can kind of forgive, um, because in the end, you get something that feels so important. I was also reading up on how there were very few movies that showcased gay relationships that were like comedies that weren't like terrible, tragedies. Much like in the same way, like it's very difficult for a black actor to win an Academy Award for anything other than a movie that has to do with civil rights or, the slave period. Or enslavement. It's like almost like we must see them in these very dramatic, terribly traumatic parts of history in order to consider them good actors, which is horrible. And in a similar way, movies hadn't gotten the amount of attention, whether critically or um, financially, up until that time, that were just kind of, comedies with heart. There was Tu Wong Fu, there were like things like that,
Yeah.
but nothing in this kind of like towing the line. And, I would assume that that's also important and why it feels like a classic movie 30 years later.
Yeah, it is. It's got a really interesting status because it's it's simultaneously completely unbelievable and absolutely relatable.
Yeah.
And that is the hardest thing to do, I think. And that's
Lightning in a
where,
bottle.
yeah, that's where Nichols and
Yeah.
May as a writer come in and just find little notes of humanity in this big, like broad, brightly lit comedy
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
grounded in a
Yeah.
way that the original like really wasn't.
Right. And it's something about Nichols and May. It's their special sauce. I mean, I would argue that they kind of had more of those projects that were successfully hitting on what you just talked about than most people, um, especially for the time period, when they started. Like, just so impressive, so cool. One would just pray to be a part of a project like that, even once in their career, would be incredible. So I could watch it every time it's on. I will sit and watch this movie.
No, that's great. And so to that end, the way I end the podcast is always with the same question, which is there anything from the Birdcage that you yourself have taken or borrowed or like outright stolen for a role or for a performance or just a general? And you've lit up. So what do you got?
Well, yeah, I haven't used it, but it's in my back pocket. I do identify very strongly with the hysterics of both the Nathan Lane character and the Diane Weiss character. I think they're actually parallels in this movie, and there is just something about a woman who, or it's funny because I think of the Nathan Lane character as a woman, and for half of the movie he is in his Mrs. Coleman drag.
Yep.
So but there is something about like a woman who is just so fiercely committed to having a very specific kind of existence, and being very protective of her marriage and being very protective of her children and being very protective of her lifestyle, that it's like she's the rabid dog at the gates, but you won't see her coming. You know what I mean? I think it was like Nancy Pelosi's daughter once said about her mother that like she'll cut off your head in an argument, you won't even realize it's off your body until it's like rolling down the stairs. And there is something very strong about women like that I in my work, but also like in my life, I would like to I would love to be that for someone. That sort of like fierce, kind of slightly unhinged protector of the things that you find meaningful in your life. Everyone needs somebody like that, someone to hold your grudges, someone to fight for you, someone to make a complete ass of themselves in order to make you feel safe. That's just something that I really am drawn to. So I don't know if that has made its way into my work. Maybe I have to age into it a little bit. But I hope to one day draw from that. And just generally the abandon in which these performers sort of went through this project um, in a way that really feels like, and I don't know because I wasn't on set, but it feels like there was very little ego to be found in that kind of performance. I did a movie called The Menu, very different kind of movie, but we had just some of the finest actors, Ray Fiennes, Judith Light, Nicholas Hoult, and they showed up to work. We all had the same size trailer. We all were like in a stinky, soundstage in Savannah in the middle of summer. And everybody just did their best, because they wanted to be there. And it felt like summer camp. And I don't know if that happened in this movie, but by the performances, you can tell that there was very little of that sort of, well, I'm the most important person here. No, I'm the most important here. No, 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 no. They were just there to make a great movie. And nowadays, that's really kind of hard to find. I definitely had that experience on Code 3 because,
Well, that
rain
thing must have
and
been like a guerrilla shoot.
oh, it was a guerrilla shoot. We made it, I don't know, 20 days or something. And like, it wasn't a big budget movie by any means. And, it took place in the matter of like of 24 hours in paramedic's life. So like we were in very close quarters in the ambulance. And I think it's a good movie because you can sense that we really wanted to be there and we wanted to just make the best movie we could. And it didn't matter that, someone didn't have like a bigger trailer than everybody else. It was all very kind of favored nations. And I love working that way because it really reminds you why you're there. You don't ever lose sight of the common goal, which is just to make an enjoyable movie. Because at the end of the day, it can move us to tears or move us to laughter. But if people aren't entertained, they're not listening. The message goes out the window. So we also have to remember that we're in the service industry too.
My thanks to Aimee Carrero, whose very fun Code 3 is now on Blu-ray and available on digital and on demand this Friday, December 19th. Thanks also to Angie Power. She knows what she did. You can find Aimee on Instagram at Aimee Carrero, all one word, and you can find The Birdcage on Blu-ray and DVD from MGM Home Entertainment. It's also streaming on Hoopla and Prime Video in Canada, and on Hoopla, Prime, and Canopy in the US, and available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhep.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 41 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, get all the boosters. I'll see you next week.